This week we're going to conclude our story of Abraham Lincoln. We'll read today and then we'll read again on Wednesday, and that will finish up our study. When we left off, Abraham had become a well-known lawyer in the state of Illinois. He was also an elected official. He would go travel to work on making laws, and then he would go back to Illinois to be with his family and with the people there again. He was loved by many for his wit, but mostly he was appreciated for his honesty. So let's continue our story today. For 15 years, Abe Lincoln was too busy as a lawyer to have time for politics. It seemed as if Mary, after all, hadn't married a man who would be president. It was Judge Douglas who had become a great politician. All this time there was a great quarrel between the states of the South and the states of the North. "It is wrong to have slaves," said the Northerners. "Let the slaves go." "Slaves they are, and slaves they shall remain," cried the Southerners, and they talked of leaving the United States and running their part of the country alone. Judge Douglas traveled through Illinois making speeches. He said, "Let each state decide for itself whether it wants slavery or not." This aroused Abraham Lincoln. He stood up and said, "All men are created free and equal. There must be the same freedom in all of the United States," he felt, "for a house divided against itself cannot stand." And wherever Douglas made a speech, Lincoln made a speech against what he said. From afar, people came over dusty roads to hear the two best talkers of the state. Judge Douglas was elected senator from Illinois, but old Abe's fame spread all over the United States. And here you see tall Abe and short Judge Douglas, and they are debating one another. That's when people gather to hear two or more people discuss things, and sometimes they disagree with one another, and people come to hear what they have to say, and then they choose which person's arguments they agree with, and then often that person will be elected into a governing position. Everywhere, people began to wonder if Lincoln wasn't the man to keep the United States together. From the big towns in the East, important men traveled to see him and asked if he would be willing to let the people vote for him as president. Abraham Lincoln thought it over for a long time. It was so friendly and peaceful on the prairie in Illinois. But all over the North, people cried, "We want honest old Abe." And at last, he said yes. Late one evening, Lincoln got the message that he had been elected president of the United States. He went home to his wife and said, "Mary, we are elected." And Mary rejoiced. Her dream had come true. Abe sold his horse and buggy and cow and made ready to leave his home. And he grew a beard on his chin. He knew he wasn't handsome, and he thought a beard might make him look nicer. On a drizzling morning, he tied up his trunks. Then he went to the train at the station. He looked at the dear and homey faces of his prairie friends who had come to bid him goodbye. He was sad that he had to go, but the people of his country had called him. "I bid you all an affectionate farewell," said Lincoln. "Farewell, farewell," cried all his friends. And with his wife and his boys, Abraham Lincoln traveled to the White House in Washington. that's the White House. Now Abraham Lincoln was a master of the White House, but he was president of only part of the United States. For the southern states had taken down the Star-Spangled Banner and raised the flag of the Confederacy in its stead. Sad and silent, Lincoln gazed through his spyglass at the Confederate flag that fluttered in the wind on the other side of the Potomac River in Virginia. He pondered how to get the southern states back into the Union. He needed quiet to think what to do. But from morning till night, the White House was crowded with people seeking his help. Lincoln wanted to listen to them all, but the days were short. He grew haggard and careworn and scarcely had time to eat and to sleep. His servants at last put up a screen across the hall so Lincoln could pass unseen. He was so tall that the top of his head showed above the screen when he tiptoed from room to room, and so gave him away to the visitors. This was before people were kept out of the rooms of the White House, apparently. Then he locked himself in his office with the men in the cabinet who were helping him with the government. No man ever loved peace more than Abraham Lincoln, but he firmly believed that his country could be great and strong only as long as all the states were united as one country. The Union must be saved. There you see they have the divider here. Okay, they had tried to make it so that people couldn't see him walking from room to room, but he was so tall, his head stood up above the divider, and the people they wanted his ear. So many people to try to talk to him and sway his opinion. It's a heavy burden being the president. With a heavy heart, Lincoln called soldiers from the northern states and sent them to war against the Southerners to force them back into the Union. The Civil War had begun. At first, his generals and the men in his cabinet all thought they were much wiser than Abraham Lincoln, who came from the wilderness. Lincoln just let them think so. He listened politely to their advices, but he did what he felt was best for the people. "Have you heard the story of the monkey who wanted a longer tail?" he said to his generals when they asked for ever more honor and power. Once upon a time there was a tribe of monkeys that was going to war. The biggest and strongest of them was made their leader. But he didn't think his tail was grand and long enough. If he was to lead them to victory, his tail must be longer, he said. And so the monkey began to add to it with pieces of tail. But the longer they made it, the longer tail the monkey chief wanted. The tail became longer and longer. In scrolls and coils it lay all over the floor. At last it grew so long that it filled the room clear to the ceiling, and there sat the monkey leader, so entangled in tail that he couldn't move any more. Thus everyone would fare who wanted too much, meant President Lincoln. Lincoln was very wise, and God had made him that way for such a time as this. The soldiers all loved their long, gangling president and his little son, Tad, who often rode at his side. For Mrs. Lincoln used to send Tad along with his father to make him take better care of himself. Lincoln was father and friend to all the soldiers. They could go to him with their troubles, and he was never too busy to tell a story or laugh at a joke. One day when he was reviewing the troops, one of the generals gave him a wild horse to ride. But Abe Lincoln was an old ranger who knew how to keep in the saddle. He raced up and down the field without even losing his hat, and the soldiers cheered till they were hoarse. "We are coming, Father Abraham, 400,000 strong. They answered from all the northern states when Lincoln called for more soldiers. And Lincoln helped them and grieved over those that fell on the battlefields as though they were his own sons. It was in memory of those men who had fallen at Gettysburg that he made his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. You're going to have the chance to watch a short video of the Gettysburg Address. It was a very short speech that Lincoln made on the battlefield in Gettysburg, Virginia, where many, many soldiers died. And it was a great speech. I want you to hear that, if at all possible. You'll have a chance to do that in a couple of days. All right, we will continue our story on Wednesday.